guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Rachel, and if you're not subscribed already, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. So today I want to share my tips and tricks in order to customize the finish and the coverage of your foundation. And a lot of these things I'm going to be recommending are things that you actually most likely already own in your collection, so you don't need to go out and buy new products, and you don't need to go out and buy new foundations in order to get different coverages or finishes. So before we start talking about some of my makeup concoctions, I do want to point out that you do want to make sure that makeup products that you're mixing have a similar base formula. For example, you don't want to mix a water-based product with a silicone-based product because that won't mix well together, or mixing an oil product with a water-based product also wouldn't really mix well together. It would actually decrease the staying power of your product. So make sure that when you are mixing together products that they do have a similar base formula. So starting off with increasing the coverage of your foundation, this is a tip I just most recently learned because I was trying to pan a concealer, and that is actually mixing your concealer in with your foundation. Sometimes I want that full coverage without feeling it, and that's where the concealer comes in because it has a similar consistency to foundations, but it has a greater concentration of pigment in it, so it provides a lot of coverage without feeling quite as heavy on your skin as like a full coverage foundation would. Also, you only need a little bit of concealer in order to increase the coverage of your foundation. So the one I've been using recently is the Urban Decay Naked Skin Concealer, and I have been mixing it in with my Ulta Demi Matte Foundation because it's a little bit light for me, and also it's a medium coverage. And so on the days where I want to look more glam and have a fuller coverage, I will mix these two. And this combination is really nice because it increases my coverage without making it feel super heavy on my skin. Alright, and then the no-brainer, no-duh tip I have for you guys is using a flat top foundation brush in order to apply your foundation versus using a sponge or your hands. I find that when I use one of these dense brushes, I am able to get a lot more coverage. And I think that when you pat on the product on your face versus using a buffing motion, you get a lot more coverage. Alright, so now moving on to my tips to get a more sheer coverage foundation, which I feel like is counterintuitive for some people. Like if you're putting foundation on, like you want coverage. But I pretty much only own like medium to full coverage foundations because I've had a lot of problems with my skin. But lately, I've been kind of digging the more lighter coverage because my face isn't quite as bad as it used to be. So I feel like this tip could be useful for some people out there. So the first tip is mixing your foundation with a primer or a moisturizer. So I typically lean towards the moisturizer route when I am in the winter months because I need extra moisture in my skin, and a lot of my foundations are super matte and drying. Not drying, but you know, they dry down. So I'll typically mix in a moisturizer into my foundation more in the winter time just because that's what works best for my skin. But this also works really great if you do have a drier skin type and you need more hydration in your skin, and for whatever reason the new foundation you try just is super drying. I would totally recommend mixing in your moisturizer. It does sheer out the coverage a little bit, but I also find it makes your foundation look a lot more natural on the skin. I don't know why, it looks a lot more skin-like to me. This is a mattifying moisturizer, so it's not like it's necessarily making me more dewy, but for some reason the finish when I mix in my moisturizer, it just gets a little bit more skin-like. So if you want more skin-like finish, I would totally recommend that. So in the summer months when my skin is really oily and I can't handle that extra moisture that mixing in a moisturizer would provide, I like to mix in primers with my foundation. And the type of primer that I mix in with my foundation depends on the kind of finish that I want. So in addition to kind of shearing out your foundation, you could also kind of change the finish of your foundation. So when I want a more luminous foundation, I will go for a luminizing primer like this one from Catrice. This is the Catrice Prime and Fine Beautifying Primer. It has kind of a luminizing finish to it, like optical blurring particles or something like that. And when I mix it in with my foundation, it gives a really like natural glow to my skin, which looks really beautiful. But there are some days where I don't want a luminous finish, but I still want to sheer up my coverage a little bit. So that's when I go for a more, not mattifying, because I find most mattifying primers are too dry and don't work in order to mix in with your foundation. Like the Becca Evermatte, I would not mix that in with the foundation because of the formula. It doesn't really play well when mixed with foundations. But I do find that my NYX Angel Veil works pretty well. It isn't necessarily a mattifying primer, but it doesn't have that luminosity that the Catrice one has. So I find this primer keeps my foundation matte while shearing out the coverage a little bit. And then lastly, this is a tip that I think some people agree with and some people don't. It's kind of split 50-50 within the beauty community, and that's using a sponge to apply your foundation. Personally, I think that I get sheerer coverage with my foundation when I use a beauty sponge, and I get a more natural finish to my skin because of the moisture in the sponge, I guess. I don't know why. Some people think it actually builds up extra coverage, and I can understand why, because you are kind of patting your foundation versus using a buffing motion like I was mentioning earlier with the brush. But personally for me, I just think that using a sponge decreases the coverage. So if you do want to sheer out your foundation a little bit, I would recommend going for the sponge method. So that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you have any more tips in order to change the finish or the coverage of your foundation, leave them down below. I would love to know. And don't forget to subscribe. I would love to have you guys around. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye!